Ladies and gentlemen, my name's John Kirk, and I have to tell you, it is my distinct and great privilege to welcome our next guest to the stage. And to list this guest's accomplishments and achievements throughout the years of entertainment that he's given us, it would take more time than I have. So let me just use the word beloved. Because this gentleman's voice has been heard in social activism, in representation, calls for injustices to be addressed. He was a personal witness during the years of Japanese internment in World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, I would gladly, as I know some of you, would sign up under the command of Captain Hikaru Sulu on the USS Excelsior. But I know that many of your families would simply welcome him as Uncle George. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to give you, and please help me to welcome, the beloved George Takei. There's one right there for you, sir.
Well, thank you for that fantastic welcome. Live long and prosper, Canadian trekkers. And I can announce to you that this is my first international convention in over 2.5 years. So thank you for that fantastic Canadian welcome. I greeted you with this, they call it the Star Trek gesture. Of course, it's the Vulcan Greeting. And I've been using there. Hello, oh, there. I've been using it all through the Scotty. I've been doing a lot of Zoom videos, meetings, and conversations. And I always start my Zoom conversation. Scott? Jimmy doing? Wake up. There. Maybe it's where I'm standing. I'll stand right here. So I've been using the Vulcan Greeting to begin my Zoom conversations or meetings or videos. But in quarantine, I've been using or adding another quarantine touch to the Vulcan Greeting. Live long and prosper and stand back. Stand back. Stand back. And I love putting my Vulcan Greeting right up to the camera where it's magnified 10 times. Hold it up here? Right there. Oh, it's the way I'm holding it. It's not Jimmy's problem. You can hear me now, can't you? Yes. It is such a delight to be here in Canada. As many of you know, I have family here as well. My aunt married a Canadian, and they got married in Canada. And I have Canadian cousins. One's living right here in Toronto, and the other one is an economist. And where do Canadian economists work? But for the government. He lives in Ottawa. And somebody from Ottawa here. It is a beautiful city. And we stayed at an unforgettable hotel called Chateau Laurier. Magnificent building up there on that promontory. And it felt like going to England in medieval times. It's a fantastic place. How many of you have stayed at the Chateau Laurier? Good number of you, yes. And here I am in Toronto, this dazzling city that I've visited many, many times. As a matter of fact, because I have family here, when you opened your, at that time, new City Hall, I was there to help celebrate that. And I'm sure a good number of you weren't there because you didn't exist. I've been around for a long, long time, and I've been around for a lot of wonderful celebrations. And this year is the year of celebration for Star Trek, because on September 8th, Star Trek became 55 years old. Isn't that something? Because all of you made it possible. Without the fans, I mean, Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek. We worked on Star Trek, and the networks aired it. But this longevity, living long and prospering, was because of the fans, all of you fans, all over not only North America, but throughout the world. It's a global phenomenon, and it's now 55 years old. And we gathered in Hollywood on September 8th and celebrated not only the 55th birthday of Star Trek, but also, you know, like all people who have birthdays, we have children called spin-off shows. And we now have a brood of children, and they all gathered, and we celebrated at a museum in Los Angeles. And a month earlier, in August, we celebrated another very important, significant birthday for Star Trek fans and all of us who love Star Trek. It would have been the 100th birthday of Gene Roddenberry, the man who created the show. Gene was an extraordinary man, and we feel very privileged to have been a part of his work, because he was a real visionary. He loved television, but back in the 60s, he thought television was being wasted because it was a period that was rife with drama and conflict and successes, but that real turmoil, the real drama of the period was not being reflected on television. We had the civil rights movement going on, where African Americans were demonstrating for equality, and they were being assaulted by law enforcement officers with attack dogs and fire hoses. It was the same time when we had the Vietnam War going in Southeast Asia that was dividing the United States. People who passionately, fiercely supported the Vietnam War, and others who were just as strongly opposed to it and were peace advocates. And there was also the hippie movement, which was changing culture, music, dance, style, appearance. All that was happening at that time, and none of that was being reflected because television is essentially an advertising medium. But Gene said, I've got an idea where we can tap the reality, the turmoil, the drama of the 1960s by using metaphor and putting it in the future, the 23rd century, and making the story a metaphorical storytelling on this starship, this vast starship. And that's going to be a metaphor for Starship Earth. And that starship is going to reflect the diversity of Starship Earth and find its strength in that diversity. Because in the 60s, diversity was what was dividing society and countries and ways of thinking. And so he said, the strength of this starship really is all that diversity coming together and working in concert as a team. And so he created the Starship Enterprise, made up of people that represent the diversity of Starship Earth. So Africa was represented by an African woman as the communications officer. Europe was represented by a Scottish engineer, played by a Canadian, Jimmy Doohan, who was born in Vancouver, British Columbia. The captain would be a North American, and one would think that the captain would be cast with an American. But the captain, too, was played by a Canadian. And he came from a part of Canada that represents at least two diversities in Montreal. And so you had a Montrealer as the captain, and he created another character that he wanted to have represent the vast area of this planet called Asia. But the challenge he faced with that was every Asian surname was nationally specific. Japanese surname, Tanaka, was Japanese. Wong was Chinese. Kim was Korean. And 20th century Asia was turbulent with warfare and colonization and revolutions. And he didn't want to reflect that. He wanted a name for this Asian character that reflected all of Asia, working together and representing that part as a diversity of the Starship Enterprise. And so he had a map of Asia pinned on his wall, and he was staring at it. And he saw off the coast of the Philippines the Sulu Sea, and he thought, the waters of a sea touch all shores. And that's how he came up with the name Sulu. And Gene Roddenberry, also being a very wise person, a smart person, and a person with excellent taste, he cast me as Sulu. And that's why I'm here in the year 2021, the 21st century. We've been trekking for a long, some of us have been trekking for a long time. Those of you who are the spin-offs of the original Star Trek fans, we welcome you and we thank you because you've been adding to the support group for Star Trek. I've always said that in many ways, Star Trek fans are like tribbles. They just multiply and multiply and multiply. Those are all of you. And so I am having a grand time and a very relaxing time this Sunday morning here at this convention. Star Trek is an extraordinary creation by Gene Roddenberry, and all of us are blessed. I feel blessed because I was chosen by him to play the character of Sulu, and that extraordinary cast that he put together. And the other thing about longevity and living long and prospering is that on that journey, you do lose some of the people that you were with. And Star Trek has lost a number of our colleagues. The first that we lost was DeForest Kelley, Doc McCoy. And he was a unique individual himself. He was from Georgia, Macon, Georgia. And being a true Southerner, he was very courtly and gentlemanly. He spoke very softly, and he had ladies go first, or he was very considerate with everything. He was probably the most gentlemanly of all of us. We lost him, and he was still, from my vantage point, very young. He was 79. That's much too young to be passing. But his Achilles heels was he was a chain smoker. He smoked all the time. And if you listen to his voice on Star Trek, it did have that smoker's graveliness. The next to pass was one of my dearest friends, and I called him my favorite drinking buddy, Jimmy Doohan, Scotty. He was a great guy from, as I said, Vancouver, British Columbia. But to tell you the truth, he became famous playing a Scotsman. His nickname was Scotty. He was a fake Scotsman. He was really Irish, an Irish Canadian. But he assured me when we were drinking together one evening, he said, I qualify for playing playing a Scotsman because I've drunk enough of the libation of Scotland. And I was witness to it. He was qualified to play a Scotsman. I still miss Jimmy. He was great. And then we lost Grace Lee Whitney, who played Yeoman Rand. But most grievously, Gracie Fan, thank you. She hears you up there. Gene Roddenberry, the man whose vision it was, whose talent it was, and whose very clever negotiating talent that it was, he passed. And that was a grievous, and I went to that funeral, and we were all there, except for one Canadian who played the captain. He wasn't there. And I guess couples, when one passes, the other passes shortly thereafter. We lost Majel. And so we lost many, many people that we loved dearly and we worked with. And the gift of Star Trek was my work colleagues became lifelong friends. And I have had my own adventures and struggles. As most of you know, and those of you who have read my most recent book, They Called Us Enemy, I was imprisoned by my own country because I look like this. On December 7th, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific. It was a horrible bombing. Over 2,800 people were killed. And the terror and the horror of that bombing spread across the Pacific Ocean to the west coast of North America, and then rolled all the way across the continent to the east coast. And the next morning, the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, signed Executive Order 9066, which ordered all Japanese Americans on the west coast. Oh, no, he just declared war. He didn't sign the executive order yet. But overnight, Japanese Americans and Japanese Canadians here in Canada were looked at with suspicion and fear and outright hatred simply because we happened to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. We had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor. And yet, out on the street, they spat on us, they assaulted us. Our homes, our businesses, our cars were graffitied with ugly slogans. the government, the United States government, came down with a curfew on all Japanese Americans. We had to be home by 8 p.m. at night and stay home until 6 a.m. in the morning. We were imprisoned in our homes at night. And the next morning, when we went to the bank to make a deposit or a withdrawal, we discovered that our bank accounts were frozen. Our life savings were taken from us for no good reason. And then the President of the United States signed Executive Order 9066, and we were ordered to be summarily rounded up, 120,000 Japanese Americans. Over 29,000 Japanese Canadians were ordered to be rounded up and imprisoned in barbed wire prison camps, tall sentry towers with guns pointed at us for the duration of the war. It was a shameful chapter of American history. And here in Canada, and the Japanese Canadians were mostly in BC on the Pacific coast, they were rounded up. They were much smaller in number, as I said, a little bit more than 28,000, and put into prison camps. But the Canadian prison camps didn't have barbed wire fences. We were confined behind those barbed wire fences and sentry towers. I got a chance to visit the Canadian camps in Vancouver, a camp called Tashme. It was deep inside one of the densest forests of British Columbia on the eastern end of BC. And the reason they didn't have barbed wire fences is because they had the forest and your winter, your weather. It would have been madness to try to escape that. You would have died immediately. So we share that common history. But because I grew up from that, I was a child, 5 years old, and when we were released, I was 8.5 years old. I was I didn't understand the internment, but I became very curious about it. I had many after-dinner conversations with my father, and I learned more about my childhood imprisonment from my father, more than from books that I read later or people that I spoke to. He said that our democracy is a people's democracy. And even great people like President Roosevelt, who he saw he experienced during the 1930s when there was that horrible economic depression. He was able to, with his leadership, galvanize the country and raise the economy of the United States. But even great people like that are human beings who are fallible human beings. As noble as the ideals of our democracy are, and they are noble ideals, equal justice under the law, a government ruled by law, due process, which means when you're arrested, you have the right to know why you're arrested, the right to know what the charges are, and then you have the right to challenge those charges in a court of law, where they have to provide evidence that the charges are in fact true. But in our case, both Japanese Americans and Japanese Canadians, there was none of that. No due process, no charge, no trial, no due process. And we were imprisoned for the duration of the war. It's a shameful chapter of our history, our mutual history that we share. And Gene Roddenberry was mindful of that too. We are fallible human beings, and we make mistakes. We had an episode titled The Enemy Within, or in the feature film, The Undiscovered Country. where, how many of you saw The Undiscovered Country? Great movie, wasn't it? Yes. And we had a brand new captain in that movie from the very first shot. Sitting in that command chair and confidently sipping my cup of hot green tea. But then all hell breaks loose. There is this explosion on this planet, Praxis, a disastrous explosion. And the waves keep coming at us. And I had to shout, shields, shields, to get our shield up. And despite that, you know, the jolt was incredible. It begins with Captain Sulu in command and beginning the pounding drama. And then at its most climactic point, when the Enterprise with Captain Kirk is about to be blown away by not the Vulcans, the Klingons. It's been some time. And I've aged, and my memory is a little kind of slippery. So the Klingon Empire is crumbling, and the Enterprise is in danger of being attacked by retaliatory Klingons. But out of the darkened galaxy sky comes Captain Sulu and the Excelsior and blasts those that Klingon ship. Thus saving the day for Captain Kirk. And at the end of the movie, like all classic Star Trek movies, it ends on the bridge of the Enterprise. But this time, a humbled and grateful Captain Kirk looks up at that giant view screen and sees that huge image of Captain Sulu of the Excelsior. And in essence, he says to Captain Sulu, "Thank you for saving my ass." Well, Captain Sulu looks down and says, "Good to see you in action one more time, Captain Kirk." And he blasts off, and you see the starship Excelsior, much bigger than the Enterprise, much faster, and certainly much newer than the Enterprise. And that duo of Scotty and Doc McCoy are looking up and see that ship, and McCoy says, "By God, that's a big ship." And Scotty chimes in with a twinkle in his eyes, "Aye, but not so big as her captain, I think. That is a Captain Sulu movie, right?" But I've talked long enough. I enjoy an exchange of conversation. Your thoughts, your comments, your opinions, your questions. So I'm told there's a roving mic around here someplace. There's the mic. So raise your hand if you have comments to make or questions. There, right there. And I'll make myself comfy.
Thank you so much for coming and for being one of the few people in the room that are older than me. I've been watching Star Trek since the late mid-'60s, so.
Well,
hello.
You've been a long-time fan.
Yeah, I have.
And
Since
yes,
the
I
beginning.
I can recognize the long-time fans by,
Yeah.
one, the color of your hair.
That's right. And this is one of the spin-offs.
Some of the original fans have no hair at all.
Yeah.
So the
Thank
two of
you.
us are lucky.
Yes. I have a question. I do have a question. You didn't mention him, but what was it like working with Leonard Nimoy?
Leonard Nimoy was a very rare, special guy. As you well know, he's a wonderful actor. And he was also a very inventive actor. I greeted you with the Vulcan Greeting. actually, that was invented or suggested by Leonard Nimoy on the set. We had a scene where Vulcan Spock was meeting a Romulan or some other alien being. And he said, I'm an alien, he's an alien, and it's not natural for us to meet each other and offer a hand. It's the aggressive humanoid reaction, to offer a hand. We should have some kind of a preliminary greeting before we get that friendly. And the director says, well, do you have a suggestion? And Leonard thought for a while, and he said, what about this? And the director was immediately taken by it. He said, yeah, that's great, use it. It turns out this was part of the rituals of Judaism, and he thought this might be a good, dignified and welcoming, but at the same time, spacing gesture. And so that's how that came about. The Spock pinch is also something that he invented on the set, because the script had Spock, this was in the first season, had Spock punching out an adversary. And Leonard, during rehearsal, said, no, this is not logical. Because first of all, it's violent, and Vulcans are peaceful people. And also, they're logical. Why should a Vulcan expend all that enormous energy that he's got on doing all that damage to another person, breaking bones, splitting the skin, and whatever else damage that would do? It should be much more rational way of incapacitating the attacking adversary. And he said, Vulcans are supposed to have enormous strength, and they know the human anatomy, that intelligence. He would see this adversary immediately as easy to overcome. He would take his great strength and know that there's that important spinal cord that the adversary has to connect with the brain. And when the blood that goes up there is cut off by the enormous strength of a Vulcan, then he's incapacitated. And so he said, what about my just pinching him and he goes limp? Again, the director loved it and adopted it, and that's how the Spock pinch came about. So Leonard was a very inventive actor. But for me, he was one of the most amazingly loyal friends. Leonard did Equus on the Broadway stage. It was first done with Anthony Hopkins, and then Richard Burton, and then Tony Perkins actually opened it first, and then Anthony Hopkins and Richard Burton, and then before the run closed on Broadway, Leonard took over. And I was cast in a production in Los Angeles to play the same role, Dr. Dysart. And because it was a mid-sized theater, I thought, it'd be a mid-sized audience. But one night, the ushers came running backstage to tell me Leonard Nimoy and his wife just came in. We seated him, and I was excited because Leonard played that very same part on Broadway. And sure enough, at the end of the show, Leonard came backstage and smiling. He had fended off all the fans just to come up to my dressing room. And so I said to him, Leonard, well, how'd I do? Leonard smiled at me and he said, you are better, which is such a typically Leonard diplomatic way of saying no comment. He was much better, and that was unquestionable, but he disarmed me with that answer. And then the other example of his loyalty was, it's been my mission in life to raise the awareness of the internment of Japanese Americans during the Second World War. And we developed a musical on the internment that opened on Broadway. That opened on Broadway. But before it opened on Broadway, we had an out-of-town tryout at one of the most distinguished regional theaters in the U.S., in San Diego, California, which is a good drive, a 2-hour drive south of Los Angeles. And so we did Allegiance there. And there, too, it becomes unannounced. The ushers came back and said, Leonard Nimoy is in the house. And so I thought, well, bless Leonard's heart, and Susan, his wife. They drove all the way down from Los Angeles and came to see me in a musical that we developed. And when he came backstage, of course, he was swamped by the rest of my colleagues, the cast, and he was very supportive. And the final thing before, Leonard became very ill, as many of you know. He too was a smoker, a chain smoker, and he was suffering from this illness called COPD, congestive obstructive pulmonary disease. And I knew that, but this filmmaker did a documentary on my husband Brad and me, starting with long before we were together. But it was a documentary, and it was called To Be Takei. And we had the premiere screening of that at the Screen Directors Guild. And because Leonard and the rest of the cast are dear friends, I sent invitations to them, but I didn't expect Leonard to come because of his illness. So it was just a pro forma invitation. But again, we were all seated, ready for this screening to begin, when at the last minute, one of the ushers came scuttling down and told me that we just heard that Leonard Nimoy and his wife are parking their car downstairs underneath the theater. And sure enough, Leonard was there. He came in a wheelchair, and he had all those pipes coming out of his face, and he had that plastic mask on, and he had this oxygen tank on his lap, and he still came to support me. I was so touched by that. And so when the lights went down, I scuttled back and thanked him. But I told him, we'll keep the lights down when the movie's over so that you and Susan can get out. Leonard was a very loyal and supportive friend to the point where I just was overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. And his passing was a profoundly grievous passing. And I'm told that I can only take one more question. Where's the mic going? Way in the back.
Hello there.
Hi.
So first of all, I just want to say how much you've made our day coming here to Toronto, seeing you speak. It is such an honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was wondering if you could share your favorite Star Trek memory with us.
One of my favorite Star Trek memories. I have so many memories, but the one that is the sweetest and a little bit aggravating, as you know, my favorite episode was naked time in which I finally got unchained from that damn console. And I got to grab my fencing foil, take my shirt off, and accost the members of the crew with my fencing foil. It was great fun, but I was a let's pretend fencer from the time I was a child. I saw Errol Flynn in The Adventures of Robin Hood, and I loved the show. And my backyard became Sherwood Forest. My mother made me a Robin Hood costume, and my neighborhood friends were all part of the crew. Maid Marian, Friar Tuck, the Sheriff of Nottingham, and so forth. And so I thought this would be a chance to kind of relive my childhood. And but then I wasn't a trained fencer, so I pulled out the Yellow Pages. I think a good number of you may not know what a Yellow Page is. It's something that we had way back in the 20th century. It was a book of Yellow Pages listing all the businesses that was available in our neighborhood, or in our city. And you picked out whatever, if you were looking for a plumber, you looked for a plumber. My time is going fast, so I'll speed it up. Anyway, I learned fencing, but because I wasn't a real long-time fencer, on the set when we were filming that episode, they were on this end of the soundstage, and I found a flat on this far end of the soundstage, very private, away from all that action going on, and I was practicing my lunges. But Jimmy Doohan is he's got a great sense of sound and smell and taste and all that. He must have heard my huffing and puffing and my leap stomping and an occasional ah. From the far end of that vast soundstage, he came shuffling over just to see what the source of that sound was. And he peered behind the flat just as I was lunging. Jimmy is an actor with a great sense of timing. And when he peered behind the flat, it was when I was lunging and I missed him by about a foot. Far enough away not to do any damage, but his eyes goggled up and his hair stood on end, and he went shuffling back all the way to the set, complaining that George attacked him with a fencing foil. And he reported that to the assistant director. And he said, no, George wouldn't be doing that. And he said, come with me, I'll show you. And he brought the assistant director over, again, just when I was lunging, and they peered over. And so he wrote me up as attacking members of the cast. Unfair, so unfair. But that happens on a set, especially with a good friend like Jimmy Doohan, my fake Scotsman, good Irish drinking buddy. Thank you all very much. May you all live long and prosper.
Just